Welcome to Upfront with Waheed Hussain. Today we are going to discuss about the Iran-US standoff in the Middle East and the energy crisis in the world and then its impact on the international economy as well as on Pakistan. I have a very prominent and eminent analyst, economic analyst with me, Dr. Farukh Saleem. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for joining me. Kindly, if you can give your input that where the world energy situation is standing at the moment when we are passing through the present situation?
Okay, to begin with, it's not just one war taking place. There's like four different dimensions to it. There's a military war taking place, there's a political war, there's an economic war, and then there's a war of narratives. And all four are taking place simultaneously. I think there's been a movement from the military aspect of it towards an economic dimension, which is the blockade, the situation that we are in right now. Now, before the war, the supply and demand of oil was such that there was a surplus of oil in the market. Uh, the globe needs about 100 million barrels on a daily basis. And prior to the war, we were producing about 104 million barrels. So there was an excess supply of about 4 million barrels, which used to put pressure, downward pressure on the prices. Now, after the war, or during the war, when the Strait of Hormuz got shut down, the world started running a shortage of about 10 to 12 million barrels a day. The prices shot up, but the prices went up, and there were two elements built into that increase. One was the fear element or the uncertainty element, and the other was actually a structural deficit. So the prices that we see today, the prices are up again today. I think they hit a high of $115 per barrel. Part of that is actual deficit, the structural deficit, and the other part of that is actually a fear premium, which is because the Strait of Hormuz is shut down and the global demand and supply is not fully certain as to what the situation is going to be in the near future. Now, the other way to look at prices over the medium to short term or over the medium to long term is to look at the markets. The future market right now, if you look at the future oil market, you can buy a barrel of oil for January 2027 delivery at around $65 a barrel. Now, that's indicative of something. That is indicating that the market players think that the war premium or the war itself is not going to last for very long, and it's trading at almost the pre-war level. If you're looking at October November delivery, it's trading at around $75 to $80 a barrel. Again, an indication what we call as the collective wisdom of the market. So as opposed to giving you my individual opinion, the market is saying that the oil prices are going to come down, and what that means is that the war itself is not going to last very long.
Well, since there is a ceasefire going on at the moment between Iranians and the Americans, but naturally there is no progress on, towards the deal that most of the time the U.S. president speak about it. Even today, the U.S. president has threatened the Iranians that they are short of time, they are running out of time, and they have to make a choice. So, do you think that all these statements and the present situation will definitely have a negative impact on the international oil market?
Um, there's been a very major news coming that came out of the UAE yesterday, whereby the UAE has left OPEC. That has had that will eventually have a major impact on the price of oil. Over the short term, I think the markets are treating that particular news as an increase in uncertainty, and you see an uncertainty premium built into it. But over the medium to long term, UAE is going to be pumping out a good 5 million barrels of oil a day, as opposed to their restricted quota, which was 3.5 million barrels, being part of OPEC. So market is going to figure that in over the medium to long term, that there is going to be some excess supply coming out of the UAE itself, and I think that would put a downward pressure on the price of oil itself. Now there continues to be, as you say, there continues to be a lot of uncertainty, whereby I would think that both the United States, the government, the political government there, and the political government in Iran are under tremendous pressure. The pressure is of different quality and different category. The pressure in the U.S. is about increasing the price at the pump. When the price of a gallon goes over $4, the American voters start going against the ruling government. So there is going to be a midterm elections in November, and I think the Trump administration is under pressure to end the war and pivot towards the economy in order to win the elections. Now, the pressure within Iran are of completely different nature. The pressure in Iran is, if I can quote what the central bank in Iran, the report that is sent out to the president of Iran, is that post-war, the central bank is expecting a rate of inflation of about 180%. Now, imagine the rate of inflation in Pakistan being 6 to 7%, and the burden on life that creates. The rate of inflation in the U.S. is between 3 to 4%, and the Bank of Markazi Iran, the central bank, is projecting a rate of 180% post-war because of the shortages in Iran. So that will put a tremendous pressure on the Iranian leadership to end the war. The other aspect is that pre-war, you could buy $1 for around 44,000 Iranian riyals. And today that parity has gone down to about 1.3 million riyals for a dollar. That means that everything that Iran imports, and Iran imports a lot of foodstuffs. Iran imports rice, Iran imports sugar, and Iran imports wheat. So all of those items that are imported would have gone up in price, let's say, by a factor of about 100% in 4 to 5 months. So that's tremendous pressure on the society, and then societal pressure on the Iranian political leadership to end the war. So there is tremendous pressure on both sides to end the war.
You are right. You are right. But naturally, in both the cases, whether it's America or in Iran, there are many center of powers. Naturally, the Americans, they have a democratic system where the president leads their team. But even in Iran, we have a different centers of power, and they have a lot of influence on the decision making, whether it's the political leadership or the religious or other leadership in Iran. Kindly tell me that the Americans claim that they have got abundance oil resources, and do you think that at the moment the Americans are making a lot of money when they are exporting the oil? Secondly, if they have abundant resources of oil in their country, then why the prices, as you were referring, is going up of all gasolines? I mean, the petrol. What is the reason when they have already taken over the wells of the Venzi? I mean, the Venezuela. They claim that they are controlling their oil production and making a lot of money as well.
All right, there's two aspects to your question. One is the reserves itself, and the other is the price of oil. There are two distinct elements that we're talking about. The global price of oil is the global price of oil, whether the U.S. has reserves or not. If U.S. is pulling out abundant quantity of oil, the price would be determined by the global markets and not by the US prices itself. There's little doubt the US is the largest producer of oil on the face of the planet right now, and it has abundant reserves of oil as well. But the reserves does not mean that the price of oil would come down.
Okay.
Price of oil is dependent on the global demand and supply matrix. And I said the global supply and demand matrix right now is showing a deficit of about 10 to 12 million barrels on a daily basis. But that, again, I think it's short term. Over the medium term or the long term, I would think that there is going to be, once again, as the conditions were pre-war, there's going to be a surplus of oil as far as the global matrices are concerned. Once UAE starts pumping a good 5 to 5.5 million barrels, and UAE is reading the future in a totally different manner. I think the UAE leadership is far smarter, or is acting far smarter than other Gulf leaderships as to what their projections are. I think the Gulf leadership is saying that there is a energy transition taking place, and the fossil fuels, which means oil, coal, and natural gas, are losing favor. So we are transiting from oil, gas, and coal towards wind, solar, and nuclear. And their perspective is that that the more oil they can pump out of the ground, the better off their future will be. So they're concerned about the quantity and not the price. So they feel that they ought to pump out as much oil as possible before the energy transition window closes, and then their plan is to invest all the oil proceeds into building a leading artificial intelligence ecosystem within their country. And I think this is the part that most other Arab leaders are missing.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is being controlled by the Iranians, and naturally the Americans have imposed a blockade on the Iran, their vessels moving out of Iran or coming into the Iran. So there's a two kinds of blockades at the moment, and mostly it is related to the political aspect of the entire situation. When we talk of Pakistan, naturally Pakistan has a good relations with Iranians. They do trust Pakistan. Pakistan has been playing a very important role, which they recognize on the daily basis. And we have seen that some of the vessels, they have been passing through the strait without any problem. On the other side, we have a very good relations with the Saudis, from where we have been importing oil. So where you see the Pakistani situation, do you think that because of the international market prices, the pressure will continue in Pakistan as well, despite the fact that there is there's no problem of supply chain as far as this oil is concerned?
Well, there's two aspects to it. First of all, the diplomatic part of it. I think I've never seen Pakistan at such a high pedestal from a diplomatic standpoint. Never in the past 80 years. I mean, here's a country of all the 193 member states of the United Nations that has good relations with Iran, that has good relations with the United States, with China, with Russia. I see no other country playing a role that Pakistan has played over the past few weeks or so. I mean, remember the night of the April the 7th and the 8th, when President Trump had threatened to eliminate an entire civilization. And we were like 40 minutes away from that annihilation, and Pakistan actually came out and saved the entire world from falling. Now, on to the oil situation in Pakistan. I think the distinction that we made earlier, it's the distinction between quantity of oil and the global price. I see that Pakistan faces no shortage of either diesel or petrol, but the global price is what the Pakistanis would have to pay. So the quantity will not be at the shorter end, but the price that is the prevailing price of the global market is what the Pakistanis would also have to pay. Every $10 increase in the global price per barrel basis, I think Pakistan ends up paying about 1.5 to $2 billion in additional payments. And you know that our balance of payment is always on the shorter end of things.
The Prime Minister today, where I was reading in the newspapers and in the news that he was saying that before the war, uh, we were just spending $300 million per day, but today we are spending almost $800 million per day. So, do you think that this is going to have an impact, especially when we are in our IMF program, and naturally the IMF would be expecting from us before even the end of this financial year, or as we are preparing for the next budget, to have more, kind of measures which will have negative impact on the people and more inflation in the coming days.
Over the past 50 years or so, there's been a lot of research between an economy or the rate of growth in global economy to the price of oil. It is said now we have very definite benchmarks. It is said that if the price of oil hits $100 a barrel, the global economy goes into a state of recession. If the price of oil hits $120, you would see a number of global airlines going into bankruptcy proceedings. If the price of oil hits $130, then that is disastrous for developing countries, more so as compared to the developed nations. Developing countries start losing their dollar reserves, and at $135, most developing countries or the countries that import oil would go into a state of solvency issues. They would start moving towards bankruptcy again. So those are the benchmarks, and those same benchmarks apply to Pakistan as well.
Can you please, a bit comment on the IMF program that we are going through? Do you think that there would be a more a kind of a conditionalities or a kind of a demand from the IMF for moving on with the present program?
My perspective on the IMF is very different. I see IMF operating over the past 80 years or so, and I see that IMF has not produced a single successful economic example. That perhaps is the case because IMF's own charter does not dictate IMF to go in and straighten out the economic direction of its members. IMF's charter states that it's more of an intensive care unit, it's more of an emergency room, whereby any of its members, when they start running short on dollars, they would provide emergency oxygen to the patient. It's not within the IMF's charter to straighten out economic policies of any of the members. That responsibility falls on the shoulders of our own economic decision makers and our own political leadership. So expecting that being part of the IMF program would straighten out Pakistan's economic flows or economic shortcomings is an incorrect expectation. I remember Einstein used to say that the definition of foolishness is to repeat the same experiment and expect different results. Now, we've gone through at least 24 IMF programs, and the results are in front of us. If we start expecting that another new program will give us different results, so that would make us, according to Einstein, is our own foolishness.
Do you think that this is a final question, please, that naturally the Middle East crisis has affected the world economies, the economies of the big countries, Do you think that if the government says that because of this entire war, We are facing a lot of economic crisis like other countries, and where you will give marks from 1 to 10 to this government when it comes to the economy, the economic team, and economic related decisions that this government has been making, including the energy decisions.
Well, my short response would be that we've actually outsourced our economic policy to the IMF. And that's where the conflict is. IMF's goal is to create surpluses, and the goal within Pakistan ought to be to grow our GDP. That's where the major clash is. But the other aspect that I want to bring up is that entire human history, wars are not indefinite. Wars end. And I see that the Iran US Israel war will eventually end. And I have a feeling that sanctions would eventually be lifted from Iran. And once we see a sanction-free Iran, uh, we have a 900-kilometer border, and across the border, there's about 210 billion barrels of oil. That's the Iranian side of it, plus about 35 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. And two main consumers in this region are India and China. And the geography is such that between the supplier and the consumer sits Pakistan. And I see pipelines going over Pakistan, oil pipelines and natural gas pipelines. And as I estimate, Pakistan would be in a position to earn 3, 4, 5 billion dollars on an annual basis in transit fees alone, uh, plus cheaper electricity, cheaper gasoline, cheaper natural gas as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farukh Saleem. It's been always a pleasure of having you on my show, since you give, actual picture of the economy.